This woman was deceived by her boyfriend into having an abortion, leaving her infertile for life, and was then cruelly abandoned. To seek revenge on her ex-boyfriend, she went as far as stealing his child. Looking at the innocent baby, the woman wanted to claim the child as her own and raise her as her own daughter. She ran through the pouring rain, holding the baby in her arms. Passers-by were all holding umbrellas, but she was running around with the baby in her arms. Laura was desperate to keep the baby from getting sick or cold, so she searched everywhere for shelter. Finally, she took the baby and hid in a tunnel. Looking at the baby in her arms, Laura was filled with hope and named her Nina. But thinking about her lover's betrayal, she could only sit helplessly in the corner and break down crying. She knew the child was innocent, but fate had cruelly thrust her into a bleak and dark life. When the child's mother returned home after shopping, she realized something was terribly wrong. At that moment, Laura arrived at a baby store to buy some formula and diapers. The store clerk, seeing the two of them soaking wet, kindly handed them a towel to wipe themselves off. With the clerk's help, the child finally got to drink some warm milk. However, Laura had no experience in childcare, which piqued the clerk's curiosity. To avoid suspicion, she lied and said she was helping a friend take care of the child. She then hurriedly took the child to the station and bought the earliest train ticket to leave the city. But as she exited the station, she happened to encounter a police officer on patrol. Fearing discovery, Laura tightly hugged the child to her chest. She turned around, trying to avoid the police officer's gaze. Her best friend was very surprised by Laura's sudden arrival. She asked if the child she was holding was the one she had been pregnant with. Laura did not deny it and happily showed off that it was her own. She then followed her best friend home. Helen asked her about the child's father. Laura lied, saying she had argued with Matt. In a moment of panic, Matt had also hit her. To avoid harming the child, she had taken her and fled. Helen felt deeply sympathetic toward Laura's situation. She didn't inquire about the child's identity but instead let them stay comfortably. She told Laura that life after marriage was mostly like this and she had long since grown accustomed to it. Laura smiled awkwardly after hearing this. She had always believed that the world would become broader once she grew up. However, the reality was the opposite. It only grew smaller and smaller. Every day, she spent her time in the cramped house with the child, unable to find any sense of self. Helen's words deeply moved Laura. She silently vowed to love this child with all her heart. At night, Laura looked at the sleeping child, her face radiating happiness. But suddenly, Nina started crying uncontrollably. Laura thought she might have wet her pants and hurried to check, but found nothing. She then guessed she might be hungry and reached for the bottle to feed her. But Nina resisted and continued to cry. With no experience, Laura became flustered. Seeing Nina crying uncontrollably, she panicked. She tried to get something to eat to comfort her, but accidentally knocked something over. Laura looked at Nina, who was scared, and kept saying sorry. In the end, she had no choice but to call her best friend for help. Helen understood the situation and took Nina into her arms. She comforted Laura, saying it was okay, then skillfully picked up the baby and rocked her gently a few times. She gave her some water to drink, and Nina calmed down. Watching Nina lying quietly in Helen's arms, Laura felt an overwhelming sense of envy. When would she ever become a qualified mother? The next day, Laura saw the news on TV about Nina being kidnapped, and a warrant had already been issued. As soon as Helen returned home, Laura quickly turned off the TV and stopped her best friend's daughter from turning it back on. To avoid being discovered, Laura immediately got up, picked up Nina, and said goodbye to her best friend. She lied to her, claiming she had just spoken with Nina's father, who had admitted his mistake and sincerely apologized. Helen, hearing that Laura and her husband had reconciled, couldn't bring herself to keep her there. She asked Laura to wait a moment and pack up all the clothes Nina had worn and give them to her. Laura knew it wasn't safe to stay there any longer. She didn't know how to face her best friend once she found out the truth. Under Helen's watchful gaze, Laura boarded the departing bus. Sitting on the bus, Laura felt deeply saddened. The world was vast, yet she had no place to call home. The incident of taking the child had made the news and appeared on TV, meaning everyone now knew. Seeing the man holding the newspaper, Laura instinctively pulled up her collar to cover her face, trying to hide her fear. Filled with anxiety, she rang the bell to get off the bus. As soon as the bus stopped, Laura hurriedly got off. She felt so helpless and afraid. Despite her exhaustion, she persisted. For as long as Nina was with her, she felt no fatigue. Laura carried Nina to the bank and withdrew all her savings. After a struggle, Laura mustered the courage to go to the police station to hand over her child and turn herself in. She knew her actions were shameful, and her child wouldn't be happy with her. But when she stepped forward, she stopped. If she checked into a hotel, she would definitely be discovered. Laura could only tidy up a bit in the baby bed at the mall. However, there were too many people coming and going, and security guards were patrolling, so she dared not stay too long. She took the child back to the place where she had lived as a child. Since she was fleeing, she had to eat first. With nowhere to go, Laura dared not stay at a hotel. She had no choice but to spend the night in the park with Nina. After days of exhausting travel, Laura was completely exhausted. She only woke up when Nina started crying. A woman nearby saw this and invited Laura to her home. The two had never met before, and Laura was afraid the woman had bad intentions. Jenny pulled her suitcase and was about to leave, but she stopped when she heard the child crying. Laura looked at Nina in her arms and felt very guilty, so she followed the woman. The most urgent task was to find a place to shelter from the wind and rain. When they arrived at Jenny's residence, Laura was stunned. Laura hesitated but eventually entered the house, which was in complete disarray. In that moment, she regretted her decision, but the woman gestured for her to come closer. Laura stepped inside and saw that the outside was in such a mess, but the rooms inside were spotlessly clean, with every item neatly arranged. It seemed like someone who loved cleanliness, perhaps out of necessity. Jenny brought out some food and told her it was freshly bought, so she could eat it without worry. She then left on her own. Laura guessed that this must be the room where her child had lived. It seemed like she wasn't a bad person, so she stayed there with Nina that evening. In the middle of the night, a fierce wind blew outside. Laura heard the sound and woke up. With nothing else to do, she got up and opened the drawer in the room. Inside, she found a notebook titled Mother and Daughter Handbook. Just as she was flipping through the pages, Nina suddenly woke up and started crying uncontrollably. Laura quickly put down the notebook. Guessing that Nina must be hungry, she hurriedly took out the baby bottle from her bag and prepared to mix the formula. Nina's crying also woke Jenny up. She peeked through the door and saw Nina crying. Unable to resist, she pushed the door open and slowly approached. Just then, Laura returned. Jenny explained that she hadn't done anything. Laura quickly picked up Nina, tried to comfort her, and apologized to Jenny. Jenny said that a woman who couldn't breastfeed was a sinner and not a good mother. Laura hugged Nina and began to blame herself. However, Jenny's strange behavior also made her feel uneasy. Early the next morning, Laura was awakened by loud knocking on the door. She hurriedly got up, opened the door, and immediately explained that the owner wasn't home. The person claimed that the lease had expired and asked Jenny to move out as soon as possible. They also questioned whether Jenny was related to her. Fearing suspicion, Laura had no choice but to nod in agreement. Just then, the phone inside the room suddenly rang. Laura hesitated, not daring to answer it. Seeing this, the person picked up the phone and handed it to Laura. Laura stammered and answered the call, claiming to be Jenny's relative. However, the person on the other end said it was impossible, since Jenny was a lonely elderly woman. The person said they would call the police. Terrified, Laura quickly hung up the phone. The woman claimed that the person on the other end was Jenny's late husband's sister. It was clear she knew Laura was lying. Laura was at a loss for words. The woman left her a business card, threatening to call the police if she didn't contact them today. After the woman left, Laura was completely panicked and hurriedly fled Jenny's house with her child. She was afraid that if she was even a second late, she would run into the police. But unexpectedly, just as she ran out, she happened to run into Jenny, who was returning home. Jenny asked Laura where she was going, and she lied, saying she was going to buy something. Jenny told her she had gone the wrong way and should go out from the other side until she reached a residential area. After listening, Laura thanked her and hurriedly ran away. Jenny told her to wait a moment before leaving. After picking up the child, her cold expression turned unusually gentle. It turned out that Jenny's daughter had died long ago. Holding Nina in her arms had awakened her maternal instincts. Laura was deeply moved by the sight of the two of them being so affectionate. Jenny told Laura that Nina was starting to teeth and that she should pay more attention to her oral hygiene. She explained that last night, when the child was crying, she had only wanted to check Nina's teeth and had no ill intentions. She envied Laura for having a healthy daughter. She also told Laura that as long as the baby was alive, that was all that mattered. Having no home or possessions didn't matter as long as she was healthy and alive. Jenny thanked Laura for letting her hold Nina and experience the happiness of motherhood once more. She told Laura that people like her, who were homeless with a child, could go to the bread stall at the entrance of the neighborhood, where there were people specifically there to help them. Seeing Jenny's sorrowful expression, Laura also shed tears of emotion. As she turned to leave, Laura thanked her. Jenny smiled contentedly and left with a carefree air. Laura made up her mind that no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, no matter who she had to break ties with, she would never part with Nina. She then followed the woman's instructions and found the van. Laura approached the woman with a mix of skepticism and hope. It turned out they were nuns from Angel's Home, a shelter for homeless women with tragic backgrounds. The nun took Laura into the van and hurriedly called over a woman wearing a red dress. She had the same tragic background as Laura, another unfortunate soul. Under the nun's guidance, all four of them got into the van. Laura had no idea where they were going, but this was her only hope. In the van, the woman pulled out a cigarette, completely ignoring the child beside her. Laura saw this and hugged Nina, trying to hide under the nun's restraint. The woman stopped. With nothing else to do, she took out a newspaper and began flipping through it. Laura saw her own face clearly in the newspaper. The photo was brightly displayed at the top. Fortunately, the nun beside her diverted her attention. She told the woman that all newspapers, TVs, and magazines were strictly prohibited inside. Laura quickly snatched the newspaper from her hands and threw it out the window. Linda looked at Laura speechlessly, but with the nun present, she couldn't say anything. That's how Laura narrowly escaped. The car drove along the winding road. It wasn't until it was almost dark that they arrived at their destination. This was Angel's Home. It was surrounded by mountains and isolated from the outside world. Without the nun's guidance, outsiders couldn't enter. Laura and Linda exchanged glances. They followed the nun through the long corridor. They came to a bedroom, where the nun introduced Laura to her and told her that they would be staying in this room. The morning exercise at 6 a.m. the next day was optional. After instructing them to get some rest, the nun left the room. Linda was very unhappy about having to share a room with Laura. She warned Laura not to let the baby cry at night because she had a temper and couldn't stand it. Laura could only agree reluctantly, as no one would know how much she needed a place to shelter from the wind and rain. The next day, the sun had just risen. Laura and the other women couldn't figure out what everyone was doing. They just stood aside quietly watching the morning weather, which was very cold. Linda couldn't sit still anymore and decided to get up and join their group to warm up. Their strange movements also deeply attracted Nina in her arms. She became very well behaved and quiet. If they were to stay here, the first thing they had to do was a physical examination. Laura explained that she had no health issues. The doctor reassured her that it didn't matter. Everyone who came here was the same. If anything unusual was found, they would be checked immediately, and she could rest assured that she could stay here with her child. Laura felt relieved upon hearing this, but then they were immediately told that the second assessment would begin. Everyone was led into a large hall. The woman introduced herself as the person in charge of education at Angel's Home. They would undergo a 10-hour training session. During this time, they must be separated from their children and absolutely cannot see them. Laura kept thinking about what to do. Before she could react, the nun directly took Nina away. To stay, Laura had no choice but to obey. The nun explained that the next assessment was crucial for their future. The questions she asked were simple. First, she asked everyone if they were men or women. Everyone was stunned and answered that they were women. The nun continued, asking why they thought they were women. Someone answered that their physical characteristics were different. Some said that women have menstrual cycles and can give birth. The nun countered, "Does that mean those who cannot give birth are not women?" Clearly, none of the answers satisfied the nun. She then gave them a 10-minute break to think about it. Linda kept complaining about how strange the nun was and how none of the answers were satisfactory. Laura, however, was too worried about Nina to think about any of that. When everyone returned to their original spots to await the nun's questions, the questions had changed. What is the one thing you most desire? Linda said she had been betrayed by the person she loved most, simply because he had a handsome face and abandoned her. The nun said that whether one is a man or a woman, beautiful or ugly, poor or rich, one should not waste precious time over such things. Since getting married, Linda had been a full-time housewife raising her child, while her husband often stayed out late. Her in-laws criticized her for not being able to both raise the child and earn money to support the family. As a result, Linda argued with her in-laws and, unable to endure it anymore, fled with her 2-year-old son. However, her in-laws caught her and sued her. In the end, the judge ruled that she had no financial means and denied her custody of her son. Since then, she has never seen her son again. After finishing her story, Linda lamented the unfairness of fate and cried uncontrollably. If she had money, she could have taken her son and fled to a place farther away. Laura lost her father at a young age, and her mother remarried shortly after. From then on, she lived alone until she met her boyfriend Matt. Having never experienced parental love, Laura desperately wanted a family. She didn't aspire to a luxurious life. Even without money, she only hoped to hold hands with someone and spend the rest of her life together. Matt made many promises to her but eventually abandoned her cruelly. Laura recounted all her misfortunes but kept her infertility and Nina's identity a secret. After the assessment, everyone went back to rest. The nun, however, called Laura aside. The results of the previous medical examination had come back. Laura's history of miscarriage had been discovered. In this place, where life was more precious than anything else, how could they accept someone who had taken a life? With no other choice, Laura kept apologizing, blaming her own naivety for trusting her boyfriend's lies. Laura begged the nun to have mercy, saying she would do anything as long as she could stay with her child. The nun listened but did not respond, instead falling into deep thought. Back in her room, Laura was filled with anxiety, constantly praying that they could stay. As footsteps grew closer, a nun entered the room. Upon learning that they could both stay, the two embraced in joy. However, the nun informed them that the other two had already been sent away. Laura was stunned and asked the nun why they had been sent away, but Linda interrupted, telling her not to pry into others' affairs. After all, they were lucky to be able to stay. The nun then led them to a large hall. The elderly woman who slowly emerged was the true mistress of Angel's home. She looked kind and told them to let go of the past and forget all the misfortune. From now on, they should live here happily like newborn babies. She also ordered someone to bring Nina over and return her to Laura. Upon hearing Nina's arrival, Laura's furrowed brows relaxed into a smile. Although they had only been separated for 10 hours, she had missed her terribly. To protect her child, Laura had made every effort, but just as she had reunited with her child, the old woman had suddenly snatched her away and placed her in her own arms. She then set her down on the sofa. She pulled Laura aside to speak. She stated that in Angel's home, everyone's property is shared. Therefore, Laura must also donate her own property. Laura only understood part of what the old woman said. She only cared whether she could live safely with Nina under their protection. After meeting with the two of them, the old woman left first. When Linda and Laura turned around, they discovered that Nina had already learned to crawl on her own. This made Laura, who was a first-time mother, very excited. It turned out that children change at each stage of their development. To witness every moment of Nina's growth, Laura stood at the other end and spread her arms wide. The moment Nina crawled into Laura's hands, Laura became the happiest mother in the world. Stealing the child was wrong, but her genuine feelings for Nina were beyond question. The child didn't bind anyone, but she bound her mother alone, depriving her of her freedom and sleep. Despite all the hardships she endured, she remained grateful for Nina's presence. Thus, Laura settled down at Angel's home with Nina. This place was far from the hustle and bustle of the world, a peaceful haven. Laura could work while taking care of Nina. When she saw Nina stand up on her own, she was amazed. Under the protection of Angel's home, Laura stayed there with Nina for 3 years. Here, they lived in isolation, unaware of the outside world. Every day, watching over Nina was Laura's greatest happiness. Under the protection of Angel's home, Nina slowly grew up. Here, there were nuns who taught her to read and write. Every day, she had little friends to play with. The nuns would also take them out to play games. Laura worked while accompanying her child. Angel's home took in homeless women. They grew vegetables, baked bread, and went out to distribute food. Everyone was struggling to make ends meet. Women with tragic fates seemed to find survival only here, where they wouldn't be rejected by outsiders. There were those who fled domestic violence, those whose husbands had taken their children away due to unhappy marriages, and everyone had their own untold secrets. Though life here was good, everyone at Angel's home was an independent individual. There are no mother-daughter relationships here. Children must separate from their mothers at night. Not being able to sleep with her daughter is Laura's only regret. At night, the female caretaker comes to check on every child to ensure they are asleep. But Nina cannot sleep. She longs for her mother's embrace. So, after the caretaker leaves, Nina rushes to Laura's room without even putting on her shoes. Laura is startled by Nina's sudden arrival. Nina didn't say a word. She climbed the stairs and threw herself into her mother's arms. Laura told Nina to go back immediately, or she would be scolded tomorrow. With Linda's support, Nina finally fulfilled her small wish. Laura slept soundly that night. The next day, someone secretly reported the incident to the nun. She scolded Laura for breaking the rules of Angel's home. As punishment, Laura was assigned to clean the toilets. She also had to do her own work and was not allowed to see the children for a week. Seeing Nina's pouting lips, Laura dared not hug her and could only comfort her by saying it was okay. However, the nun's inhumane rules still aroused Linda's dissatisfaction. She believed that the house rule of not acknowledging the mother-child relationship was wrong. It was only natural for a child as young as Nina to need her mother's love and care. Linda stepped forward to defend Laura but was met with a cold stare from the nun. She stated that she wouldn't waste her breath on someone who didn't understand the rules and ordered everyone to leave. After everyone had left, Laura could only bow her head in humiliation and apologize. To stay there, she dared not utter a single complaint. After finishing her own work, Linda came to the bathroom to clean with Laura. She told Laura that the two of them could work faster together. Linda couldn't understand why such a good place wouldn't acknowledge the existence of a mother-daughter relationship. The child was right in front of her every day, yet she could only watch from afar. Even the simplest hug was forbidden. After hearing this, Laura couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. Linda thought that if Laura could live with her daughter, perhaps she could also bring her son to live with them. But Angel's home didn't take in men, not even a 5-year-old boy. So Linda suggested that the two of them escape together with Nina. She knew where the money from each donation was kept. As Nina grew older, she would need her mother more and more. If there was no basic communication, she would eventually no longer need her. Linda's words deeply pierced Laura's heart. If this continued, she would inevitably grow distant from Nina. It seemed like it was time to leave. Linda used the excuse of going to the bathroom to slip away. She knew the female owner kept all the money in a drawer. With that savings, she could take her son and flee to a safer place. She hurried into the room, daring not to waste a single moment. Just as everything was going according to plan, they were discovered. When Laura rushed back to meet them, she found someone already standing in the room. The nun turned around with a vicious glare, as if she wanted to devour them both. Laura realized it was all over. After counting the money, the mistress claimed that the two of them were trying to run away with the child. Linda didn't deny it, silently agreeing with her guess. The nun found it utterly incomprehensible. Such behavior was simply unforgivable. The mistress, however, said it was fine. They were first-timers and hadn't succeeded. Moreover, only Linda had a driver's license, and she was of great use to the Angel's home. The mistress told them that even if they took the child with them, the child had no household registration, which meant he couldn't go to school. Linda demanded, "Can I bring my son here?" The mistress and the nun exchanged glances but said nothing. Linda said she understood not taking men, but why refuse a 5-year-old boy? The nun told her that women's misfortunes were always tied to men. From then on, Linda became depressed. Laura saw this and didn't know how to comfort her. Not being able to live with her child was the hardest thing for any mother to accept. However, Linda's theft had undoubtedly become a thorn in the nun's side. She instructed Laura to accompany Linda whenever she went out and to keep a close eye on her. If anything happened, Laura would be considered an accomplice and would face severe consequences. Just as they were about to leave, Nina ran over. She told her mother that she also wanted to go out and play. At that moment, the nun came out and took Nina away. Laura watched helplessly. On the way, Linda told Laura that the nun had once had a child. However, due to her family's care, she developed severe postpartum depression after giving birth. When the child was only 3 months old, the nun's mental state began to deteriorate. The baby's crying at night made her restless and anxious. She actually threw the infant from the upstairs window. After hearing this, Laura couldn't calm down for a long time. If it weren't for Nina, she would have been the murderer. Linda told Laura that the nun had been sentenced to probation. Perhaps considering her illness, she was ultimately given a lenient sentence. While driving, Linda suddenly braked. She told Laura that she really missed her son. Even just seeing him from afar would be enough, and she swore she would never cause trouble. Linda's pleas left Laura in a difficult position, but as a mother herself, how could she refuse? In the end, Laura agreed to Linda's request. As Linda's car got closer to her home, Laura's heart raced with excitement. Linda looked at her son's clothes hanging in the yard and his bicycle parked nearby. Her son had grown so tall. Just then, a little boy came out of the house. He was putting on his shoes and didn't notice his mother's arrival. Linda knew she couldn't miss this opportunity. With tears in her eyes, she gathered her courage and approached him. But after years of absence, her son no longer recognized her. To ease the awkwardness, Linda claimed she also had a son the same age who loved playing with a spinning top. She then casually pulled the string, causing the top to spin non-stop on the ground. Watching the spinning top, the boy was thrilled and praised his sister for being so skilled. He never would have guessed that the person silently standing beside him was his mother. Hearing her son call her sister, Linda felt a mix of emotions. She wanted so badly to tell him she was his mother and rush into his arms. But just then, a voice called out from inside the house. The boy heard the call and ran back home without looking back. Thinking of her promise to Laura, Linda hurried back. She told Laura that the child didn't remember her. Seeing Linda crying, Laura didn't know how to comfort her. But Linda didn't want Laura to worry, repeatedly saying that she was fine. She promised that once they had saved enough money, they would come back. After hearing this, Laura also started crying. Just as they were getting into the car to leave, the woman came to the road with the child. It turned out that the husband had remarried shortly after Linda left. Hearing that the child wanted bread, Linda hurriedly got out of the car. The woman stood by, half-heartedly introducing various things to the child. She had no idea what the child liked. Linda tried her best to hide her emotions while observing from the side. Finally, she couldn't help herself and bought a chocolate bread. The child thought his sister was amazing for knowing his favorite bread. Linda claimed it was a gift from his sister. Laura hurried out to explain that children's gifts were free. After hearing this, the stepmother hurriedly thanked them and had the child say goodbye to his sisters. Seeing the two of them holding hands and walking away, Linda's emotions finally erupted. She had once risked everything to take her son away and fought tooth and nail to do so. But alas, one person could never stand up to an entire family. As a housewife, she had left with nothing, no job, no income, yet she had never forgotten that she was a mother. These words deeply pierced Laura's heart, and she couldn't stop crying. Perhaps it was for herself, or perhaps it was for Nina's biological mother. After composing themselves, the two drove back to Angel's home. Seeing her mother return, Nina followed the car closely, chasing after it. Linda envied Laura and Nina for being able to spend every day together. But when she looked up and saw the ruthless nun approaching, she turned away without hesitation. Since returning from visiting their son together, the two had come to terms with reality and never considered leaving again. Until one day, a pregnant girl arrived at Angel's home. At 17, Emma was in the prime of her life. Upon learning she was pregnant, she insisted on keeping the baby no matter what. Her parents opposed her relationship with her boyfriend and had her forcibly taken to the hospital multiple times. To save the baby's life, Emma had no choice but to seek help at Angel's home. Seeing the nun suddenly go into a frenzy, the female owner signaled her to stay calm. The nun only then realized how terrifying she must have been. Emma had only been there for a few days when she suddenly went into labor that night. Everyone gathered around the door, blocking it completely. The doctor and the nun were by Emma's side, helping her give birth. Watching Emma scream in pain, Laura finally understood how agonizing childbirth could be. Seeing Emma's hands struggling to find something to hold onto, Laura stepped forward and gripped her hands tightly. With everyone's encouragement, Emma finally gave birth to a daughter. Seeing the newborn's first breath, everyone was overjoyed. The nun suddenly remembered that she had once had a daughter. From the joy of discovering she was pregnant to the heartbreak of losing her, only a mother could truly understand. No matter the reason for abandoning her child, she owed this little angel an apology. The nun was like a different person from that day on. Laura also gradually grew to love this place, where there were only women. Though they had all been hurt, they were all exceptionally kind. However, such a peaceful life did not last long. A group of unwelcome guests arrived at the gates of Angel's home. Emma's father demanded that Angel's home return his daughter. He accused them of imprisoning Emma and confiscating her property. To make a big deal out of it, they even brought in media reporters for an interview. However, Laura and the nun had just returned from their charitable work. The media rushed over to Laura, asking her about Angel's home. Laura feared being photographed and desperately tried to cover her face with her clothes. Emma witnessed her father's absurd behavior and felt powerless to intervene. To prevent the situation from escalating further, the nun stepped forward to address the situation. Soon, Angel's home was featured in a major news broadcast and appeared on a radio station and in newspapers. At that moment, Matt was on night duty, and the footage of Laura being photographed was also aired. Matt was very emotional and looked at her with an unreadable expression. Just like that, Laura's whereabouts were exposed. At this moment, Emma's father was still not letting it go and brought even more people to cause trouble. The once carefree Angel house was instantly filled with chaos. Emma knew that everything was her fault and could only keep apologizing. But Linda had a straightforward personality and would not allow anyone to slander Angel house. Upon hearing Linda's resistance, all the sisters came to help. They told them to leave and not destroy their happy home. The nun saw everyone getting agitated and told them to stop. She said that if this continued, the police would soon intervene. Rather than sitting idly by, it was better to take the initiative. So she decided to open the doors of Angel's home tomorrow and invite all the journalists inside. Someone suggested handing Emma over to calm the situation. The nun said that couldn't be done. Laura panicked after hearing this. If the police got involved, her identity would be exposed. Not only would she be arrested, but she would also lose her husband and daughter. Linda accidentally saw Laura's hidden identity. After seeing it, she threw it into the fire. The young Nina didn't understand why they had to leave. She hadn't even said goodbye to her friends. Laura searched the entire room but couldn't find it, which made her feel inexplicably anxious. But just then, Nina pulled out the box from under the table. Sure enough, her daughter was a ray of light, always bringing hope in times of despair. Linda came to Laura but didn't expose her identity. Instead, she scolded her for not taking more money. She told Laura that after leaving, she would have to rely on herself for everything. Laura didn't know how to explain and couldn't find the words to say. Linda handed Laura the address of her parents' home. If she had nowhere to go, she could seek help by claiming to be her best friend. She then urged Laura to act quickly and leave before the female homeowner finished dealing with Emma. This latter was the only way out. Linda had discovered it by accident while cleaning. Without time for small talk or farewells, Laura climbed down the ladder and left. But Nina was only 3 years old. She was afraid of falling and hesitated to go down. Fortunately, Linda acted quickly and avoided being noticed by the nun. She encouraged Nina not to be afraid, assuring her that her mother was below. The moment Nina let go, she fell into her mother's arms. Laura and Linda bid each other a tearful farewell. The words "take care" carried 1,000 unspoken blessings for each other. Laura, who had escaped, didn't dare to linger for a moment. She grabbed Nina and ran into the jungle. But Nina had never left Angel's home. Facing the unfamiliar environment, she was terrified and cried out, wanting to go back to find her friends. Seeing Nina so upset, Laura felt guilty and quickly picked her up. They had to leave before the sun set and the jungle swallowed the last rays of light. This scene was too beautiful. They kept walking until it was dark and finally saw a water source. Laura quickly picked up Nina to drink water but found the faucet was broken and couldn't be turned. As soon as she saw the headlights of a vehicle approaching, Laura hurriedly pulled Nina into hiding. She was afraid it was Angel's home searching for them. They hadn't eaten or drunk anything, and they didn't even know where they would stay for the night. Looking at the unfamiliar surroundings, Laura also began to feel lost. Just then, a car approached, and Laura quickly picked up Nina and hid. But upon closer inspection, she realized it was just a taxi. Laura asked the driver to take them to the bus station. She wanted to rush to Linda's hometown that night. In the car, Laura was exhausted. Nina knew nothing about the outside world. She realized that the sky could be so vast and that the moon could move along with it. Seeing the suddenly appearing sparkling circle in the sky, the adorable Nina was filled with curiosity. Laura told Nina that it was a Ferris wheel. The basic meaning of a Ferris wheel is that no matter whether you are at the peak or the bottom, you are always at the center. Thus, Laura temporarily changed her plans and took her daughter's hand, leading her to the star-studded amusement park. Watching Nina having so much fun, Laura finally realized how selfish she had been. By closing herself off, she had also closed Nina off from the beauty of the world. From the window frame of Angel's home, she couldn't see the stars or the moon outside. There were no zoos, amusement parks, department stores, or men. Laura silently vowed to give Nina everything beautiful in this world. She bought Nina an ice cream. Seeing the pure, white ice cream, Nina couldn't resist taking a bite. Nina told her mother that it was cold but sweet. Hearing Nina's words, Laura smiled happily. Though she didn't know how far she could go from here, she would still charge forward without hesitation. Laura and Nina caught the last ride on the Ferris wheel. Sitting on the Ferris wheel, Nina looked down at the city at night, which was lit up with lights everywhere. She hoped her mother wouldn't leave her and that they could stay together forever. The most important thing in life was to be happy. As long as you had little stars in your heart, life would shine brightly. The next day, Laura took Nina on a cruise ship to Shodoshima. Nina took out a piece of chocolate and gave it to Laura. Laura asked her where she got it. It turned out that Nina had just passed by a store and taken it without thinking. Having never been exposed to the outside world, she had no idea that you had to pay for things. Laura told her not to do that again and to tell her mother if she needed anything. After a long cruise, they finally arrived at their destination. Laura was trying to figure out which direction to go when a police officer on a bicycle came toward them. Laura saw him and quickly took Nina and ran away. After asking an old man, they found out Linda's address. But Nina, who had no sense of safety, really scared Laura. It seemed that the two of them were about to face a completely new life, and it was bound to be full of difficulties. After some twists and turns, Laura finally found Linda's mother's noodle shop according to the address. Seeing the job posting on the door, Laura pushed open the door and walked inside. She asked the shopkeeper if this was Linda's home. Upon hearing Linda's name, the waitress hurried inside to call the boss out. The woman told Laura that she was Linda's mother. Linda had never returned home since she got married. Laura lied and said that they were colleagues, but now the company had gone bankrupt. Linda wanted to stay and continue looking for a job, so she asked her to come and visit her mother. After some small talk, Laura asked if she could stay and work at the noodle shop. When she entered, she had already seen the job posting on the door. Linda's mother claimed that the job posting had been there for 2 years. Laura smiled awkwardly and took Nina back to the pier. But by then, there were no more boats leaving. Where should they go next? Laura's voice caught the attention of a man. This was the second time he had seen Laura and Nina. Earlier at the pier, Nina had climbed the wall to wave at him. Rick told Laura that the hotel across the street was hiring. Laura was also feeling lost at that moment, but upon hearing that the job included room and board, she followed the slope and went there. As soon as she entered, Nina spotted a Buddha statue from afar, as if she had returned to Angel's home. It was clear that she really missed that place. Laura eventually started working as a waitress there. She chose the night shift so she could take care of her child during the day. The woman looked at Nina, who was very well behaved. She asked Laura why she didn't send her child to school. After hearing this, Laura was taken aback and could only lie that she didn't have enough savings yet. The next morning, Laura dragged her tired body back to their resting place, carrying Nina, who was still asleep. After a busy day, Laura was exhausted. Nina, however, told her sleeping mother that she was a little hungry. Seeing her mother so tired, Nina, being a considerate child, went to the beach alone. At that moment, Rick, who had introduced Laura to her job, happened to pass by. Nina told the man that she was hungry. When Laura woke up and felt refreshed, she discovered that Nina was nowhere to be found, neither in the house nor in the yard. After searching the entire house, she still couldn't find Nina. Laura glared at the man with a fierce expression. Rick said nothing but brought Nina back to Laura and handed her the fish he had caught early that morning. Laura truly believed he wasn't a good person. After giving the fish to Nina, Rick left without looking back. It wasn't that Laura was cold-hearted. Her ruthlessness was forced upon her by men. Despite earning a meager income doing the hardest work, Laura was still content. This small island had a sparse population, and few outsiders ever came in, making it relatively safe. The man, seeing Laura's unfamiliar face, immediately began to flirt with her. Laura found him disgusting and ignored him, turning to leave. A colleague told Laura that such men were common in this line of work. If she avoided them, they'd only think she was easy to bully. Laura didn't want trouble. Stability was precious to her. As she was carrying Nina toward the front door, she seemed to hear the sound of a plastic bag. It was Rick coming to bring Laura some fish again. Laura told Rick not to be so polite. She couldn't repay him. Watching Rick's departing figure, Laura began to wonder what he really wanted. Back home, Nina was asleep, and Laura stayed by her side. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. In this unfamiliar place, who could be coming? Laura opened the door to find Linda's mother standing there. Linda's mother said she needed to discuss something with her and asked her to come out. If you haven't changed your mind, come work for me. It's inconvenient to work in such a place with a child. And so, Laura moved into Linda's house with Nina. Linda's mother brought out a lot of clothes. She told Laura that these clothes were prepared every year for Linda to take back to her parents' home with her children. Unfortunately, since she got married, she had never returned. Their only contact was occasional phone calls. It was heartbreaking to think of how much a mother loves her child, no matter where they are or how old they are. Linda's mother really liked the well-behaved Nina. As an elderly person without children to accompany her, She felt very lonely. At that moment, Laura resolved to take Linda's place and take care of the elderly woman. The next day, Linda's mother took Laura to her family's noodle factory. Laura finally had a stable home and settled down on the island with Nina. 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. Those 2 years were the happiest times of their lives. During the day, Laura worked at the noodle shop, and Linda's mother helped take care of the child. Laura poured all her love into Nina. If her actions were wrong, her eyes were sincere. In these carefree days, Laura seemed to have forgotten that she was a fugitive. She enjoyed the warmth of the sun and the hope Nina brought her. On this small island, facing the sea with spring flowers blooming, everything seemed peaceful and calm. But Laura knows that no matter how vast the ocean is, it cannot accommodate someone who has made a mistake. Although Nina is not Laura's biological daughter, she loves her deeply in her own ordinary yet meaningful way. She does not seek wealth or status. She only wants to be with Nina day and night. Although taking Nina away left her world in shambles, it is also her unwavering hope. On a rare day off, Laura spends all her time with Nina, because she overheard that those who watch the sea together will walk far and wide together in the future. The wind is gentle, the sea is romantic, and Laura finds Nina very special and loves her dearly. All happiness and misfortune have an end. Just as the sea is beautiful, ships must eventually return to shore. Laura took Nina to the mountain to pray. They say that if you pray with all your heart, it will come true. She told Nina to clasp her hands together and silently pray, thinking that whatever she wished for would come true. Happy times are always so short. Although the two played all day, they weren't tired at all. When they returned home, it was already dark. Rick would still bring Laura fish as usual, always choosing times when they weren't home. Laura seemed to no longer reject Rick and began to accept his kindness. Nina told her mother during dinner that she loved this place very much, because here, she could always be with her mother. Laura told Nina that she was her mother and would never leave her, and she would always be by her side. Laura worked hard at the noodle shop. Her sincere service and ability to remember each customer's preferences earned her widespread praise. Even Linda's mother couldn't stop praising her. Rick, who was delivering fish to Laura, suddenly arrived at the noodle shop. Laura's expression froze upon seeing him. Rick, however, acted as if he didn't recognize her and sat down at a table in the shop. Laura handed him a glass of water and asked him what he would like to eat. But Rick didn't respond and instead started reading the newspaper. Seeing that he didn't react, Laura quickly retreated to the kitchen, feeling awkward. But Linda's mother, who was sharp-eyed, came to the noodle shop without eating anything but reading the newspaper. She told Laura that although Rick appeared cold on the surface, he had a kind and honest heart. However, his life had been filled with hardships. He had lost his beloved son in an accident, and shortly after, his wife had abandoned him and left. After hearing Rick's story, Laura felt deeply sympathetic toward him. Rick didn't eat anything during his stay and left on his own after a while. Laura saw this and hurried after him. She thanked Rick for always bringing her fish. Rick asked her if she was afraid of men. If that was the case, then she should stay away from him in the future. From then on, Laura began to gradually let down her guard and try to believe in the existence of all things beautiful again. Nina also integrated into life on the island and made many new friends. If she could, Laura really hoped to stay here forever, but she didn't expect that an accident would happen. One night, as the two were walking home, Nina, who had been chatting happily, suddenly stopped in her tracks. She told her mother that her stomach hurt. Laura didn't think much of it at first and told her to endure it for a while, but after taking just a few steps, Nina crouched down again. She told her mother that her stomach really hurt. Seeing Nina clutching her stomach in pain, Laura finally realized the seriousness of the situation. She picked up Nina and ran as fast as she could. The island was sparsely populated. At night, there wasn't a soul in sight. Fortunately, they managed to hail a private car. In the car, Nina kept screaming. Laura could only keep comforting her, which made the driver very anxious. When they finally arrived at the hospital, they found the doors locked. Laura held Nina tightly and kept pounding on the door until she finally woke up the on-call doctor. Nina lay on the hospital bed, sweating profusely. After examining Nina, the doctor informed Laura that her condition was critical. She had intestinal obstruction. However, the medical equipment here was limited, and she needed to be transferred to a larger hospital on the mainland immediately. If they left now, they might still make the last ferry. Seeing Nina in such agony, Laura didn't dare to waste a single moment and rushed to the pier in a panic. But in the end, they were just a little too late. Laura watched helplessly as the ferry grew farther and farther away. No matter how much she cried and screamed, It was all in vain, until the fairy disappeared from her sight. Laura could no longer hold back her emotions. She hugged Nina and knelt down, breaking down in tears. Her cries echoed throughout the entire port. At that moment, Rick had just returned from sea and was preparing to go home. He walked over and realized that the person kneeling there was Laura. When Laura saw Rick, her eyes were filled with tears, her gaze conveying nothing but helplessness. Rick's eyes also welled up with tears. Without a word, he started his boat and took Laura with him. What truly moves people is not words, but actions. What remains constant is not false enthusiasm, but sincere effort. Rick was very considerate and kept his distance from Laura. He knew that Laura had been hurt in the past, which was why she was so afraid of men. The doctor came out and said that the child was fine. Laura rushed into the ward as soon as she could. If Nina had been harmed, Laura's world would have collapsed. It was unimaginable how a mother could go on living without her child. Seeing Nina sleeping peacefully, Laura finally relaxed. However, since Nina didn't have a household registration, all the medical expenses would have to be paid out of Laura's own pocket. Laura was taken aback when she heard the amount, but she gritted her teeth and emptied all her savings. Rick noticed Laura's distress. Once Nina was stable and awake, Laura took her home. Laura was deeply grateful to Rick for his help and thanked him repeatedly. But just as he was about to leave, Laura told Nina that she had to go to work. Rick immediately offered to help take care of Nina. Nina didn't explicitly accept, but she didn't refuse either. After much hesitation, Laura decided to trust Rick. Nina's illness had already depleted all of Laura's savings. As soon as she got off work, Laura rushed home, but when she opened the door, she heard Nina's cheerful laughter. It turned out that Rick had intentionally lost to Nina in a game to cheer her up. Laura went to the kitchen and found that yesterday's dishes had been washed. Rick had also given Nina her medicine and cooked a bowl of congee for her. Laura was deeply moved and invited him to stay for dinner. Rick didn't refuse. He then took out his savings and placed them on the table. He told Laura that this was the medical expenses he had returned yesterday. Laura quickly returned the money and stopped him from doing so. But Rick told Laura that he was alone with no one to care for, and no matter how much money he had, there was nowhere to spend it. However, Laura disagreed. As a woman with a child, if Nina's illness were to relapse, the money could save her life. Rick also told Laura that 5 years ago, he had a happy family. But after his son died tragically, their relationship grew increasingly strained. Without a child, even living together couldn't mend the wound. Laura listened to Rick's story and didn't know how to comfort him. Rick covered Nina with a blanket, then stood up to leave. But as he was leaving, he accidentally bumped into the doorframe and almost fell. Laura saw this and reached out to help him. The moment her hand touched his, Rick felt as if he had been electrocuted. Laura's heart began to race. The two looked at each other, both wounded and vulnerable. Rick understood Laura's experiences. Laura also understood his struggles. What they felt was not so much empathy as a shared sense of suffering. After fleeing for so long, Laura had lived in constant fear every day. Finally, on Women's Day, she had a kind shoulder to lean on. At that moment, she felt at ease and enjoyed an unparalleled sense of security. Linda's mother called Laura and Nina into the house and urged them to come in. Seeing how excited Linda's mother was, Laura pulled Nina back and dared not go in. Tomorrow was the annual insect sending festival on their small island, a day to pray for a pest-free rice harvest. This tradition has been passed down through generations, and everyone in the family, regardless of age or gender, must participate. Laura didn't want to take Nina out in public. She refused Linda's mother's invitation. She felt she wasn't qualified and should wait for Linda to return before going. It turned out that her mother knew her daughter wasn't doing well in her in-laws' home, but instead of bringing Linda back, she thought her daughter lacked patience and couldn't endure hardships. Laura had hoped to find some comfort and warmth from her mother. Instead, she was met with even harsher scolding from her mother. As a result, Linda has harbored resentment toward her mother ever since. You insisted on marrying the person your parents opposed. After hearing Linda's mother's words, Laura couldn't bear to refuse anymore. The next day, Laura took Nina to participate in the ritual. Nina, who had never seen such a scene before, was overjoyed. Laura momentarily forgot that she was a wanted criminal. She didn't notice that someone was filming nearby. Rick was hiding in the crowd, watching them intently. Seeing Laura pampering Nina like an angel, Rick was completely captivated. He became even more determined to take care of the mother and daughter. Laura and Nina were having a great time, truly immersing themselves in the life of the island residents. She brought Nina to the island, and they lived a stable life for a long time. Under Laura's care, Nina was doing very well. Nina began to resemble a child born and raised on the island. Her skin was dark, and she spoke with a thick accent. On days off, Laura would take Nina to pray, hoping to wash away her sins and keep Nina by her side forever. But Laura never realized that she was a wanted criminal. Once she had committed a crime, even if she took Nina to another world, she couldn't escape. Nina had already grown accustomed to life on the island. However, when she saw her friends going to school with backpacks, she felt an overwhelming sense of envy. Laura couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness when she heard Nina's words. She was willing to do anything for Nina, but the one thing she couldn't do was send her to school without a household registration or a birth certificate. Even if she started a new family, she would have to go through the proper procedures to obtain them. However, as Nina grew older, her desire to go to school grew stronger and stronger. As Laura feels the joy of Nina's growth, she also endures the agony within her heart. She desires more than anyone else for her daughter to carry a backpack and sit in a classroom. On weekends, Laura secretly takes Nina to school, where they spend a joyful day together. She even disguises herself as a strict teacher and enters the classroom, which makes Nina very happy. At this moment, Laura is truly happy. Nina's arrival has melted away all the misfortune in Laura's life. From then on, Laura worked even harder to ensure a better future for the two of them. Laura also wanted to fulfill her daughter's dream of going to school. However, to avoid unnecessary trouble, Laura began treating Rick like a stranger. Rick could only find a spot and sit down on his own. When he saw Laura arrive, he had intended to chat for a moment, but to his surprise, Laura put down her things and left. Rick was puzzled for a moment, wondering if he had done something wrong, watching Laura laugh and chat with other customers while ignoring him. The islanders, who were very kind-hearted, gradually became familiar with Laura. After work, Laura was in a good mood, but as she passed by the port, Rick suddenly appeared. Laura saw him, nodded politely, and then ran away. Rick took Laura to the place where they first met. He honestly confessed his feelings to Laura. Laura said she was an unlucky person. Facing Rick's heartfelt confession, Laura could only cruelly reject him. She was a fugitive with a criminal record. What right did she have to deserve true love? Laura went to the factory to pick up Nina and take her home. But as soon as she entered the courtyard, she saw Linda's mother lying motionless on a chair. Laura was so scared she rushed over to check. It turned out that Linda had learned from Laura that she was here and would return today. The old lady was deeply grateful that Laura had come, allowing her to see her daughter again. Linda returned to this familiar place but lacked the courage to enter. The old lady kept looking toward the door and finally saw her daughter returning. She rushed toward Linda with great excitement. However, Linda responded with unusual coldness and gave a perfunctory reply. But when she looked up and saw Laura and Nina, her attitude did a complete 180. Once sisters who had shared hardships, it was truly rare for them to meet again. Back at the store, the old lady made Linda's favorite stew, but Linda wasn't grateful at all. But out of consideration for Laura, she was reluctantly dragged inside by her mother. Rick couldn't stop thinking about Laura and came back to the noodle shop. He wanted to ask Laura to take Nina to the beach when she was off work. Laura hesitated about what to do, but Linda, who had just come out, saw everything. The old lady saw that Laura was still cold toward Rick, so she wanted to introduce Laura to a man with a stable job and good benefits. Linda thought Rick was a nice guy and sincerely hoped Laura would be happy, so she used Laura's name to invite Rick to the noodle shop. In front of the staff, she deliberately mentioned that the two were dating, causing everyone to cheer. Everyone in the noodle shop knew about Laura and Rick's relationship. The old lady was also trying her best to bring them together. Faced with everyone's goodwill, Laura was torn and couldn't bring herself to refuse. She could only bring Nina along with Rick to the beach. Laura told Rick about her painful past. She didn't know what kind of ending would be worthy of all the hardships she had endured. Laura knew Rick was a good man, and if they were together, they would definitely be happy. However, that would mean she would have to give up her life on the run. Laura had always wanted a family, but no matter how big the world was, there was no place for her. Faced with the choice between Rick and Nina, Laura's answer was clear. She had to ruthlessly reject Rick. Even if she had to flee to the ends of the earth and spend the rest of her life alone, Laura was determined to be with Nina. When Laura returned to the noodle shop, everyone excitedly pulled her over to look at the newspaper. It turned out that during the last sacrificial ceremony, the photographer had taken photos of the villagers, including Laura and Nina, and they had won an award. The photos would be publicly displayed in public places. Everyone was happy for Laura and envied her. completely unaware of Laura's expression growing increasingly stiff. Seeing her photo displayed in the most prominent spot, Laura immediately flew into a rage. Laura suddenly realized she had been forcing a smile and left the noodle shop with Nina. Rick, standing nearby, seemed to notice something was amiss. As soon as Laura returned home, she began packing her bags. She knew this was no place to stay any longer. If anyone recognized her on this small island, there would be no chance of escape. Nina saw her mother packing again and seemed to understand something, but she didn't understand why her mother always had to move suddenly. She immediately threw her clothes on the ground. She loved her friends here. She loved the endless ocean. She loved the free life on the island. Seeing Nina kneeling on the ground and crying, Laura couldn't bear to continue. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Laura opened the door to find Rick standing there. Rick had noticed something was wrong with Laura at the noodle shop. Now he could hear Nina crying. Laura lied, saying Nina had accidentally knocked something over. Rick still didn't feel at ease. He looked up and saw Nina crying, as well as the clothes scattered all over the room. He said he didn't care about Laura's past and would help her solve any problems. Laura deeply loved the man in front of her and loved the small island full of warmth. She couldn't bear to see Nina sad. Rick didn't want to force the woman he loved to leave with both hope and disappointment. If everything went as planned, once this door closed, the two of them would never see each other again. But Nina was Laura's only weakness. In the end, she respected Nina's choice and agreed to stay, but Laura knew that giving up and staying meant waiting to be arrested. The separation from her daughter is also approaching, so she cherishes every remaining day. She tries her best to create memories that Nina can remember. Laura takes Nina to a photography studio. This is the only family photo they have taken in 5 years. The two of them in the photo are radiant with happiness. Looking at Nina's expectant gaze, Laura doesn't answer, but her sorrowful eyes tell us this will be the last time. Then the two went to the mountain. This was the 88th time Laura had brought Nina to pray, but this time, she didn't pray for them to stay together forever. Instead, she prayed for forgiveness from heaven and for Nina's safety in the years to come. The prayer spot was at the very top of the mountain, requiring a climb up a ladder. Laura told Nina to stay put and wait. If she called out to Nina from above, Nina must answer. Laura struggled to climb upward, occasionally looking back. Finally, she reached the summit. Laura had heard that the higher one climbed, the more effective the prayer would be. She wrote her wishes for Nina on a piece of paper. Laura approached the deity and prayed. She prayed that Nina would grow up virtuous and live a life of peace and prosperity. After finishing her prayer, Laura hurriedly prepared to descend the mountain without waiting for Nina's response. Laura panicked instantly and didn't even think about her own safety. She stumbled and ran down the mountain like a madwoman. Even though she knew Nina was about to return to her biological mother, she still loved her deeply. Even if they only had one more second together, it would be a gift from heaven. Laura asked everyone she met and searched everywhere for Nina's whereabouts. Just then, she saw her little head peeking out from behind a rock. Nina saw her mother's anxious expression and comforted her, telling her not to cry. She also realized that she had made a mistake and made her mother angry. Laura said that as long as Nina was there, she would be fine. On the mountain, Nina found a cicada shell. Laura told her that the cicada wasn't dead. It was just the shell it had shed. The cicada was definitely still somewhere on the mountain. On the way back, Nina kept complaining about the cicada. Laura told her that cicadas only live for 7 days, and 7 days is equivalent to their entire life. So they cherish every day and even feel that sleeping at night is a waste. That's why cicadas keep chirping at night. Nina decided to keep the cicada shell and make it a companion for the cicada. That way, it wouldn't be lonely for the rest of its life. After hearing Nina's words, Laura said nothing more. Perhaps Nina's life would be brilliant, but Laura could only see her off. At the noodle shop, Linda's mother complained that her daughter never came home and didn't bring her grandson back. If she had been more patient with her in-laws, she wouldn't have had to leave the child with them. However, these words deeply hurt Linda. Linda explained that she had been enduring everything in her in-laws' home. She had endured beatings for her son's sake, but when she had fled with her son to file a lawsuit, her mother hadn't even offered to help. Linda never imagined her mother could be so cold-hearted, not even giving her a chance. The old lady had tried to speak several times but ultimately couldn't bring herself to say anything. Seeing her mother's lack of understanding, Linda stormed out, vowing never to return. When Laura returned, The two happened to meet at the door. Linda told Laura that she was planning to take the ferry, and asked Laura to stay behind and take care of her mother. Laura understood the old lady's predicament. There was no mother in the world who didn't love her child. She pulled Linda back into the noodle shop and told her to look up and see. The old lady prayed every day, holding a piece of paper, praying that she would return home safely soon. At the time when Linda was fighting the lawsuit, the noodle shop was going through its most difficult period. After hearing this, Linda remained silent, but her heart ached. That night, she called Laura to her room. She told Laura that no matter what, she had to leave. She had grown accustomed to life in the big city and felt out of place on the island. Moreover, she wanted to go out and find opportunities to bring her son back sooner. Linda also told Laura that she knew Laura had her own reasons. Although she didn't understand the details, she knew Laura was a good person. Linda knew that Laura had been on the run and couldn't stay long, but she pleaded with Laura to wait for her to return. Seeing Linda's sincere expression, Laura couldn't bring herself to refuse and agreed. She knew her time was limited, and taking care of the old lady was her way of repaying Linda. The next morning, Linda boarded the earliest ferry to leave. Before she departed, her mother handed her the rice balls she had prepared. She reminded her that it would spoil easily in this season and to eat it early. Linda was still complaining about her mother being too nagging. She told Nina to stay with her mother and never leave her. She said a simple goodbye to Laura and boarded the departing ferry. Everything between her and Laura was understood without words. This farewell also signified that their next meeting would be a long time coming. Cherish all unexpected encounters and take all gradual separations in stride. Linda's departure also left Laura deeply moved. She realized that parting was so painful and that not every farewell would lead to a reunion. In the days that followed, Laura cherished every moment she spent with Rick. She sat on the beach with Nina, watching the most beautiful sunset and spending time with the person she missed most. Everything seemed so distant and unattainable. The sunset was beautiful, but alas, it was nearing its end. A lifetime is but a dream, and half of it has already passed. At the time of their parting, Laura had intended to leave Rick some words of farewell, but the words stuck in her throat and she couldn't bring herself to speak. There were so many things she wanted to say, but she couldn't express them. She blamed herself for everything. Even if the police hadn't arrested her, she wouldn't have the face to stay by Rick's side. Before going to sleep that night, Laura kept reading Nina his favorite Fox picture book. Only when Nina fell into a deep sleep did Laura feel at ease. That night was like the calm before a storm, like the darkness before dawn. In the morning, while Nina was still asleep, Laura got up early to prepare breakfast. Just as she was calling Nina to wake up, Linda's mother called. Hearing the sudden hang-up, Laura was momentarily stunned. She knew this day would come, but she didn't expect it to come so soon. The pasta on the stove was boiling, but Laura knocked it over. This meant Laura had to take another gamble. If she gave up on escaping, she would have to part ways with Nina after this breakfast. To make Nina leave willingly, Laura had no choice but to lie. Laura didn't have time to pack her bags. She grabbed Nina and ran out the door, facing Nina's innocent and romantic nature. Laura couldn't bring herself to tell her the truth. She couldn't even remember how many times she had fled, but this time, she would be leaving forever. Suddenly, Laura stopped in her tracks. She picked up Nina and looked out at the endless sea. How could she bear to leave the sky, this sea, this countryside, the kind-hearted people here, and the man she loved deeply? The 2 years she had spent on the island were the happiest days of Laura's life. The friendships, love, and family she cherished were all here on this small island. She couldn't even remember how many times she had fled with Nina, or how much longer they would have to keep running. Every time they just started to get used to life, it was time to say goodbye again. Originally, she had planned to just wait here until they were captured, but when that day finally came, Laura realized she couldn't let go. Even if she only had 1 hour left with Nina, she would cherish every second of it. Laura walked along a small path, leading Nina secretly to the pier. She wanted to buy the fastest boat ticket to leave this place. Fortunately, Laura managed to buy a ticket for a ferry that would leave in just 10 minutes. But just then, Nina said she was hungry. Even though there were only 10 minutes left, Laura didn't want Nina to go hungry, so she took her to the nearby restaurant. As they entered, Nina accidentally dropped something. Laura picked it up and realized it was a cicada shell. She felt a surge of comfort, even in her haste to leave. Nina hadn't forgotten to take her most precious possession with her. The memory she had given Nina was perhaps like this cicada shell. Laura hurriedly bought some bread and milk for Nina. Just then, A staff member rushed over and said the boat was about to leave. Rick also arrived at that moment and signaled to Laura to hurry up. When Laura left with Nina, the police had already arrived. Nina had no memory of her biological parents. Upon learning that their daughter had been found, her biological parents rushed over immediately. Hearing a woman call her by a stranger's name, Nina looked completely bewildered. Her mother couldn't wait to embrace her. However, Matt was holding a girl about the same age as Nina in his arms. This meant that shortly after Nina went missing, they had already made new plans. Perhaps it was to make up for the loss of a child, or perhaps they had already given up on Nina. Kate's embrace didn't bring her daughter a shred of warmth. Nina was so scared that she wet herself, soaking her shoes. Kate noticed something was wrong. Seeing her daughter's cold expression, her eyes grew sharper. Matt never let go of the child in his arms, looking utterly disbelieving. Kate's expression grew increasingly solemn. The unfamiliar environment and tense atmosphere left Nina terrified and at a loss. Kate's tears welled up, but she suppressed the anger burning inside her. When Nina was taken back, she washed off the dirt-covered scent from her body and became a little princess in the big city. But she had lost her husband, and her angelic smile was gone. To outsiders, they appeared to be a happy family, but the young Nina knew she had never been accepted by her mother. Having grown accustomed to life on the island, Nina found it difficult to change her thick accent. Why were the two women, both mothers, so different in their attitudes toward Laura? No matter how careful Nina was, her biological mother's expression remained cold and unforgiving. Her father had also chosen to avoid her. The unfamiliar environment left Nina feeling suffocated. She longed for Laura's loving gaze and the warmth of her embrace. Here, Nina often spent entire nights awake, staring into the darkness until dawn. If the angel's home was a cage, then this house was a hellish prison. Nina wants to return to the vast ocean, to the place where she believed Laura still existed. So, while her parents were still asleep, Nina sneaked out. But no matter which direction she went, she couldn't see the ocean she longed for. Once, it was Laura who had pulled her along, running endlessly. This time, Nina chose to flee alone. But when she reached the crossroads, she was lost. Which way should she go next? All she wanted was to find the sea and run home along it. Why was it so hard? Kate discovered Nina escaping and rushed after her. She immediately slapped Nina hard across the face. Nina said tearfully that she wanted to go home. Under Kate's influence, Laura had become someone more terrifying than a demon. The innocent Nina also believed Laura was a bad woman. From then on, Nina sealed away her memories of Laura. She forgot that she had once been a cheerful girl. She forgot the person who loved her deeply and gave her such intense gazes. 5 years later, Laura faced Nina's biological parents again. She thanked them for allowing her to experience the joy of raising a child over the past 5 years. Matt, feeling guilty, dared not look at her and turned his head to look at his wife. Kate's furious expression seemed ready to kill Laura. Thus, Laura was sentenced to 7 years in prison. In prison, Laura began to endure the long days. Fortunately, there was a cicada shell, the one that had fallen off Nina when they were forcibly separated. Laura wrote Nina a letter every few days, though these letters could never be sent. Speaking to herself became Laura's only source of strength. Thus, Laura spent 7 years in prison. Upon her release, she emerged carrying the weight of her memories. She wondered how her beloved daughter was faring now. On the day Nina turned 13, Laura came searching with a heart full of longing. She wasn't sure if Nina had already learned the truth. Perhaps she had forgotten their past, or perhaps she had forgotten Laura altogether. After an internal struggle, Laura finally gathered the courage to approach. As soon as she arrived at the courtyard, Laura spotted Nina through the glass from afar. Even after 7 years, Laura recognized her instantly. Listening to the songs coming from inside the house, the family seemed so happy and harmonious. Watching Nina make a wish and blow out the birthday candles, Laura fell silent for a moment. What identity should she use to appear? Perhaps not disturbing her was the best way to love Nina. Besides, Laura didn't know what else she could do for Nina. Although it wasn't what she wanted, it was what Nina needed. Actually, she could have thick-skinned and pursued her, but Laura felt that it was meaningless. She silently prayed that Nina would be healthy and happy. Even if she could only see her from afar, that would be enough. Nina grew up and buried this memory deep within her heart, never mentioning Laura again. But she hated that woman who had changed her life with all her heart. And Nina's sad expression made it clear that she wasn't happy either. Until one day, a girl handed Nina a newspaper from 15 years ago. It detailed how Laura had set the fire and taken Nina away when she was 6 months old. After reading it, Nina forced herself to remain calm and acted indifferent toward Laura. She didn't understand why the past was being brought up again. The girl explained that she was Nina's childhood friend from Angel's home. They had been inseparable as children. As an adult, she had become a journalist. Sally took Nina back to the former Angel's home. But time had changed everything. The place was now in ruins. A dilapidated courtyard. The police believed that Angel's home had sheltered Laura and her daughter after they fled. The place was sealed off shortly afterward. Sally took her to the vegetable patch where they had once worked. She told her that this was where the mothers used to work. Then she took Nina to the schoolhouse where they had once studied. Trying to jog her memory, Sally could tell that Nina harbored resentment toward Laura. She had come looking for her simply to uncover the truth. Laura was not the wicked woman portrayed in the newspapers. She told Nina that everyone who came to Angel's home had tragic backgrounds. Upon learning the true reason Laura had taken her away, Nina was overwhelmed with emotions and remained silent, because she now faced the same dilemma: betrayal by her boyfriend and an unplanned pregnancy. Perhaps it was fate's cruel twist. Or perhaps heaven wanted Nina to experience the same turmoil and despair Laura had felt. Nina didn't want to follow in Laura's footsteps and resolutely broke up with her boyfriend. She told her mother about everything she had gone through. Kate was furious and slapped her daughter across the face. She couldn't understand why her daughter had become this way. Perhaps this was heaven's punishment for her. Back then, when Laura had asked her to meet, she had constantly provoked her with harsh words. Kate knew that Laura had just lost her unborn child. She sent Laura a fax in Matt's name and said many cruel things. Laura was already physically weak and had been working continuously. Add to that her depressed mood and refusal to eat or drink, and it ultimately led to this tragic outcome. Nina had never forgotten all these years. It was her biological mother's influence, combined with the passage of time, that made the memories blurry. But she still felt a mysterious pain in her heart. Nina resolved to find Laura. Sally heard that Laura had been released from prison and came to Tokyo immediately, but her whereabouts were unknown afterward. The only place filled with happy memories was Shodoshima. Could she have gone there? The two went to the noodle shop where Linda's mother had once worked, but the woman told them the shop had been taken over by someone else. Moreover, Linda's mother had passed away 5 years ago. The woman had no recollection of Laura either. The trail to find Laura had come to a dead end, and the two were at a loss. If Laura wasn't on Shodoshima, where else could she have gone? They arrived at the school where Laura had once taken Nina to play. Suddenly, Nina felt a sharp pang in her heart. Fragmented memories began to flood her mind. Everything she saw was a memory, and everything she thought of was the past. It turned out that all these years, she had never let go, only burying her longing deep within her heart. The two then went together to the mountain where Laura had once taken her to pray. Looking at the steep slope, Nina finally understood how much Laura had loved her, unwilling to let her get even a little hurt. As they descended the mountain together, Nina suddenly stopped in her tracks. The silhouettes of her and Laura flashed before her eyes. The cicada shells in her hands were everywhere, and the sound of cicadas filled the air. More and more memories that had been sealed away were being unlocked. She remembered the temporary happiness she had with Laura, but all that happiness made her so sad. As Nina descended the mountain, she found a cicada shell identical to the one from years ago. This only strengthened her resolve to find Laura. Nina followed her faint memories back to the streets of Shodoshima. She had to find the photo studio where she had taken pictures with Laura. Memories may fade, but photos never disappear. As soon as she entered the door, Nina saw the family photo, prominently displayed at the entrance. Looking at the familiar yet unfamiliar face of her mother, Laura's features grew clearer in Nina's mind. It turned out that forgetting and letting go were two entirely different things. Nina's heart was filled with overwhelming emotion. This was the only family photo they had. Though they hadn't found Laura, their journey had brought them something invaluable. Nina's memories were becoming clearer and clearer. After leaving Tokyo, Laura came to a place where no one knew her. She found a stable job at a supermarket. Though it was hard work, she had a place to call home. But there were moments when she would suddenly feel restless for no reason. Laura could resist contacting Laura, but she couldn't control the longing in her heart. Even if she could go to Shodoshima to feel the sea breeze you once felt, or walk the paths you once walked together, it would be a kind of comfort. But when it came time to board the boat to the island, Laura stopped in her tracks. She simply didn't have the courage to board the boat. Even if she returned, what would be the point? The island no longer had Nina, and she could never have that little girl again. Laura understood this rationally. but emotions don't follow logic. Laura ultimately stayed at the port because this place had once been the bridge to happiness between Laura and Nina on Shotoshima. Laura eventually settled here, spending her days cleaning. This world is full of illusions, but only pain never lies. The beginning was beautiful, the process was exhausting, and the ending was tragic. But staying awake is the hardest part. Every day after work, Laura would stand blankly at the port, gazing out at the sea. Though she lived under the same sky and the island was just a short distance away, it felt so distant to Laura. Every time the sun was about to set, Laura would stretch out her arms to embrace it, feeling the joy the sea had brought her and Nina, and savoring the warmth the sunset brought her. This world is filled with people coming and going, but Laura has only the sunset for company. When she spreads her arms to embrace it, Laura feels as though she is holding the young Nina in her arms. That heavy, weighty feeling is as though Nina is nestled in her embrace. Laura doesn't know that Nina has been searching for her all along, and the fisherman they happen to ask for information about is none other than Rick, the man who once deeply loved Laura. Rick looked at the girl before him and finally realized she was the Nina Laura had raised all those years ago. After 15 years, Rick never dreamed he would see her again. Nina desperately wanted to know what Laura had been screaming in agony on the day they were forcibly separated. At the time, the scene was chaotic, and the cries of the two, mixed with the ship's horn, made it impossible for Nina to hear clearly. Rick told Nina that Laura had missed the boat because she had gone to buy milk and bread for her. Upon learning that Laura had once again sacrificed herself for her, Nina could no longer control her emotions and tears streamed down her face. Laura had been thinking about her even in her final moments before being arrested, worried that she was hungry. In Nina's heart, Laura was not a kidnapper but a mother who had sacrificed everything for her. Since they couldn't find Laura on the island, they had no choice but to board the ferry and leave. This visit also brought clarity to Nina, who had finally remembered every little detail of her time with Laura. She firmly believed that if fate allowed, they would meet again. Nina's earliest and deepest memories were all connected to Laura. Even if her biological parents were kind, Nina couldn't bring herself to be close to them. She hated her father because he had caused Laura to be unable to have children. It was also his actions that indirectly led Laura to take Nina away. But Nina also hated her mother because she constantly nagged her, saying that every time she saw her face, it reminded her of that woman. So Nina closed her heart and chose a life of solitude. Matt made Laura unable to have children, turned Laura into a kidnapper, and sent her to prison. His daughter Nina also encountered a bad man. He too had a family and couldn't bring Nina happiness. Nina understood the pain Laura had endured back then. She decided to keep the child and raise him alone. She believed he deserved to come into this world and enjoy all its beauty. The path she had walked with Laura was similar. Both had been deceived by bad men and ended up pregnant out of wedlock. But their paths were also different. Because she had a child of her own, she didn't have to worry about anyone taking him away. If she and the child were willing, they could have continued living on the island. As she left, Rick ran after her and called out to Nina. He waved his hands at her just like Nina had done when she was a child. This was his blessing for Nina and his farewell as she left. Nina was deeply moved and kept waving her hands at Rick. She thanked him for his kindness toward her and her mother when she was a child. Rick had left Song after Laura was taken away. He hoped Laura would return one day. In his heart, Laura was a good woman and a good mother. Nina opened her heart and called her mother at home. She told her she planned to keep the child. Some things we know have no outcome, yet we still throw ourselves into them without hesitation. And Nina was the most innocent one of all. After disembarking, they arrived at a shop in the port. The shop assistant was Laura, who had worked there for many years. Laura had never returned to the island. She had never accepted Rick's love, because she knew she was a sinner and knew her fate. Although her subconscious mind wanted her to go back, she never had the courage to take that first step. When Laura looked up, she saw Nina sitting outside. Every movement reminded her of the girl she had been longing for. But for a moment, she couldn't be sure. Over the years, whenever she encountered a girl resembling Nina, Laura couldn't tear her gaze away. Though she looked very much like Nina, she immediately dismissed the thought. Perhaps it was just a hallucination caused by her longing. After Nina and Sally left, Laura began cleaning up. While tidying the table, she accidentally discovered a cicada shell left behind. Laura picked it up and clutched it tightly to her chest. At that moment, she suddenly realized that the girl she had just seen was indeed Nina. Is blood more important than experience? Would you love someone more who taught you to hate or someone who taught you to love? We cannot judge who was more qualified to be a parent. Although Laura had been so deeply hurt by a man, she did something truly astonishing. She still taught Nina to believe in love. That's why Nina said she wanted her mother to get married, because then her mother wouldn't be a single mother anymore. Although I hate your parents, my love for you is pure and unconditional. Adults who make mistakes will eventually get their comeuppance, even though they always think they are the most innocent victims. Actually, the most innocent person is Nina. She doesn't even have the right to be happy. These cold, selfish, and cannibalistic people. Some people eventually become birds and cicadas, destined never to love each other. In love, the one who gives the most is always the one who breaks the other's heart the most. A free and romantic bird meets a tiny, weak cicada. One flies toward the beauty of the marketplace, the other makes its home in a tree trunk. To the bird, you are one of the scenic spots it visits, but to the cicada, you are its entire summer, its entire life. In a relationship, the one who types the most loses, the one who screenshots loses, the one who reads the chat history loses, the one who cries loses, and the one who is always forgiven loses. Later, you'll realize that the person you can't let go of and can't forget ultimately has no meaning. The ones who stay by your side aren't the ones you desperately chase after. It's like when the bird tells the cicada, "See you next year." Only the cicada knows that see you next year means see you in the next life. Actually, we all know that birds and cicadas are two different creatures. Just like Laura and Nina. Laura appeared when Nina was still young enough to afford to lose. After all, some feelings have no other choice but to say goodbye.